Hi, I'm Ian Higginbottom, and I want to talk to you today about 8 conversations for effective leadership, management, and collaboration. I want to say 8 conversations. I mean 8 conversation types, but I don't mean there are only 8 important conversation types to leadership and management, but I've picked 8 to look at today. Before we start, let's take a breath. So often at work, we come into a new conversation, still going on with stuff in our head from our last conversation. Sometimes all it takes is a breath to be able to let go of the previous one, come into this one. If you've got anything on your mind you need to write down, I invite you to do that now. And as I go through these 8 conversations, I invite you to assess yourself, to rate your skill in each conversation on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. 0 is like you're really quite unskilled. You avoid the conversation whenever you can. Whereas 10 is highly skilled. You utilize the conversation, you almost seek it out, and it's easy for you to have the conversation. You don't need to share this with anyone else, but I'd like you to reflect on it after the video. Also, invite you to assess whether each type of conversation is underused or overused in your team and in your organization, and whether you want to be looking across teams, across the silos of your organization, or you don't want to look within your team. Either way can be useful. So here we go. The first one is conversations for stories and assessments. Now, these are normal and everyday. We want to get things off our chest or to share our views, our judgments of what's going on in a situation. This is incredibly important. We probably all, from time to time, just need to vent to someone, just to let off some steam. And that can be incredibly valuable, quite, therapeutic, really. But we've probably all had the times in our life or met other people who let off and vent about the same topic over and over and over again. And what goes from being a useful vent that lets us move on to solving a problem to merely something like whinging and whining to no good effect. So a useful topic done well, or a useful conversation type done really well, overused actually could be quite negative. So take a moment, rate yourself 0 to 10 in your competence and comfort in having this conversation, and also have a look around you. Is it underused or overused in your team and in your organization? Next, let's look at the conversation for clarity or a conversation for understanding. So the purpose of this conversation is to ensure we have a mutual understanding of an issue or a topic. Because how do we problem solve or even just move forward in an area if we don't have that shared understanding? In the world of delegation or making requests, this is critical. You may have had that experience where you've asked for something or been asked for something and you're clear what was wanted or what you're asking, and the other person was actually clear of what was wanted and what was being asked for, but those two clarities were different, and the result then doesn't match, and there's disappointment or frustration or annoyance, waste, rework, all because a little bit of time wasn't taken at the beginning to have a conversation for clarity. Again, rate yourself from 0 to 10 on both your competence and your comfort with having this conversation. And have a look around you. Is it underused or overused in your organization and team? And anytime as I'm going through today, just feel free to pause the video to give yourself time to do the reflection you need. Conversation for possibility. So this is a speculative conversation. It's done in the mood of speculation. You can almost imagine putting your feet up on the desk, leaning back. I wonder what we could do in this situation. So the idea of the conversation is to generate ideas, to explore different possible futures, what might be possible. So in this conversation, it's really important that any suggestion or idea that's put forward is not considered an offer to do it or a commitment to do it, because that will suppress our willingness to put forward ideas if we put it forward and people think we've just committed to doing it. Similarly, this is the world of perhaps brainstorming, where there's no such thing as a bad idea because it's speculative. We could do this. Oh, we could do that. Or, gee, bounce off that. We might do this. Sometimes you'll meet an organization or a team where this is a missing conversation. And what happens is there's a problem or something to be solved, and people jump into action. They go, I know how to deal with this. Bang, they're off, they're doing things, but they haven't paused to look at whether there are other possibilities, perhaps better ways or other approaches that could be considered. But similarly, I've met teams that get caught in conversations for possibility. So therefore, we could do this, or we could do that, or we could do this. And this could be the world of paralysis of analysis, where we're really looking, but really looking for the best possible solution, but never actually get to choosing one. So if we're trapped in overuse of possibility, we don't get to action. If we have underuse of possibility conversations, we jump into action prematurely and may implement a poorly thought out solution. Conversations for action, or conversations for coordination of action. And this is a sequence of conversation that includes things like making requests and getting commitments. But this is about how do we actually get things done and bring about a new reality. It's all very well to have a great idea. We know it would be valuable if it is done, but if we don't ask anyone to do it, perhaps it won't happen. So these are the conversations that preclude action, without which action doesn't happen. Again, how do you rate yourself? What's your competence in conversations for coordination of action? And is this well used, underused, overused in your team and organization? Conversations for progress. Another important conversation is all very well. Someone started a 3-month project. 3 months later, we wonder what's happening. We haven't heard, but it might be much shorter. I was coaching someone very recently who was saying someone on their team says, yes, they'll do something, but the delivery date comes and then there is a conversation, maybe we could call for excuses. I got busy on this and that, and this happened, and so I couldn't do it. And those circumstances may have been very real, and it may in fact have been the lowest priority thing and quite appropriate that the work wasn't done. But what was missing was the conversation, so everyone stayed on the same page. So conversations for progress will keep us on the same page, whether or not a project or a task is moving on schedule, or it's behind, or there's a problem, or I need help. So we pause, we monitor progress towards meeting our commitments and our goals. I think this is one of the conversations that's the secret to no surprises. If this conversation is done well, there is no reason for there to be surprises at the end of a project or the end of a task after the commitment, because you as the requestor, or whether you're the supplier, the person doing the task, either of you can make sure these conversations are happening to ensure there's no surprises for either party at the end. How do you rate your competence and comfort with this conversation? Conversations for progress. Are they missing or well used in your team? And what do you see with your supervisor or people around you. And particularly thinking about this with requests and work that is not done within a hierarchy, where you're actually working with somebody in a different part of the organization or a stakeholder. Do you engage in these conversations for progress to check that you're all on the same page with the project or a piece of work that is being done or has been offered? Conversations for appreciation, to publicly declare recognition, value, appreciation, gratitude for others' contributions. Now, public declare doesn't necessarily mean it has to be in front of a group. It might be one-on-one with a person, but the point is, it's not just in your head where it's private, it's out in the world. I recall some years ago doing some consulting in an organization where, in fact, I took them through this very exercise, and they realized that conversations for appreciation or conversations for acknowledgement were quite missing in the organization. Started off with the directors saying, staff complain that they don't get acknowledged. But then the directors themselves were saying, yeah, but we don't get acknowledged. Nobody thanks us for the effort we put in. So there was no expression of gratitude and appreciation between the directors of this organization with them for their staff or for their staff back. And this left a little hungry hole for recognition. So again, how do you rate yourself? Are you highly competent or not in conversations for appreciation? Do you use them appropriately? Are they missing from your team or missing from your organization? Is there somewhere you need to ask for appreciation and acknowledgement? The request for acknowledgement is often a missing conversation. Conversations for accountability, or you could call this a conversation for a responsible complaint. I contrast responsible from an irresponsible complaint, because an irresponsible complaint is like a whine and a moan, where we're just complaining, and we're probably not complaining to the person that could do anything about the situation. Whereas a responsible complaint is an assessment of the situation and a request for something to be different coming or being made to a person can actually make a change. So an accountability conversation may be to take care of a broken promise. And an important part of this conversation then is to establish whether or not a promise was actually broken. So if you've asked, or you think you asked someone to do something, and it turns out there was a lack of a conversation for clarity, and they thought you asked for something different to what you thought you asked, and delivered something different or that you weren't expecting, well, it's not a broken promise. It was actually a breakdown in getting conversation for clarity. Similarly, if there were no conversations for progress, if you allowed something to go an entire month, having asked someone to do something and didn't check in or make sure those conversations were happening, then really there's been no management of the promise along the way. It was broken, but you're just as responsible as them, because you haven't ensured that those conversations are in place. So it's really important to look at, was there a promise in place and was the promise actually broken before it's sensible to have an accountability conversation? If so, then we might be wanting to express the unacceptability of not keeping promises and seek a new promise. So in my experience in the public service, people sometimes are afraid of a conversation for accountability because they perceive they might almost be harassing a person, but often it's just their discomfort, that their anxiety in actually having a conversation for accountability. When done well, there is no harassment. There is merely an agreement. It's like a coaching conversation. Did you agree to do this? Yeah. Did you? No. It's been some consequences. Could you make it up? It's not a conversation to be done in a mood of blame or make wrong. Because if you're in a mood or you're blaming people or you're making them wrong, they are not going to come out of that feeling very good. But if you have this conversation in a matter-of-fact way, where your emotions aren't aroused, or they're aroused in the space of curiosity about what could be done better, then that's a very positive conversation that both has accountability and improves a relationship. So how do you rate yourself in conversations for accountability and in making responsible complaints? Do you have them where you should? Are they missing? What happens in your team and in your organization? Conversation for relationship. So, like it says on the slide, to not avoid and to constructively address a breakdown in a relationship. So we've probably all had this at work at some time. There is some friction with somebody else in the working relationship. You've been annoyed at them in the past, they haven't delivered, or they've offended you. It could be many causes, but that friction means you're not easily working together. It's hard to have the conversations you need to have. I've seen organizations where there are two people who just can't talk to each other, and all the work between them has to go through a third party. This is incredibly wasteful, never mind the emotional, energetic kind of loss of having to be at work with somebody with whom there is that breakdown in the relationship. So a conversation for relationship is not about a particular topic or a particular thing that's happened. It's a conversation about how we relate. Sit down and actually put on the table and address the fact that there seems to be some strain or a breakdown in our relationship, and look at what can be done about it. This is part of a set of conversations we might call courageous conversations. It takes something to instigate them, and you may need to manage your own moods and emotions in the face of it. Many of us get really quite anxious about instigating a conversation for a relationship. Yet without them, relationships spiral in a negative direction. With them, you can start the positive spiral that improves the relationship and improves the conversations and improves work outcomes. How do you rate your competence in a conversation for relationship and your comfort with having it? Are you having the conversations for relationship that are important for getting your work done and having your team fully function and your organization be high performing? Is this an overused or an underused conversation around you? Okay, well, that's 8 conversations that, in my assessment, are essential for effective leadership, management, and collaboration. And so not just essential that they happen at all, but that we have competence in them, that we can approach them not just with the right words, but with the right mood and the right body disposition to have them happen effectively. So I invite you to spend a few minutes. Just pause the video if you would like. Write some notes. What have you noticed about where you're competent, where you're not, where you're comfortable, where you're not? What else came up for you about your work and your organization in your life in looking at those conversations? You might have noticed where they're missing, or you think they're missing from other people, in which case you can reflect on that. So where are they missing? Where are they underutilized? And what's the consequence of their being missing or their being underutilized? Or in some cases, of being overutilized. If you would like to share your responses, please go to this address, menti.com, and enter the code. It's on the screen, 118-2202. I'll put this in the comments or put it in the text below the video so you can see that. Similarly, you can go to this little URL, I won't read it out, to get the results. And again, I'm going to put that below the video in the text. And you'll be able to see others sharing from those questions of what were your responses and what are the consequences. In doing that, remember this is a public document, so please don't use people's names. Don't put anything confidential from your work in there either, because others will be able to see this. Well, that's my take for today on 8 essential conversations of leadership, management, and collaboration. And just to finish up, oops, wrong direction. I invite you to take some time, maybe just a few minutes, to design some new actions and practices. Leadership, management, collaboration, I'd argue is like a full body sport. It's an embodied physical thing. It's not something we just have a conceptual understanding of. I can understand these conversations. I can understand the importance of having a conversation for accountability or a conversation for clarity. It makes sense. But if I don't physically practice them, uttering the words, seeing how that sits in my body, doing it enough times that I'm not only relaxed, but I'm competent in having them. We can't suddenly, well, most of us can't wave a magic wand and transform our entire self in this space. But we can pick a couple of areas where we're going to design new actions and repetitive or recurrent practice. Do you practice with a friend or a colleague? Do you practice literally on the job? You start going out and having more of the conversation that's missing and seeing how it goes and then taking the learning. But I invite you, just for yourself, spend a few minutes, design or choose some new actions you're going to take and what you can do to practice and build your competence and your comfort with those new actions. Thank you for listening. This has been Ian Higginbottom from Reflecting Power. I look forward to seeing you again.